So I'd like to welcome from the USA, Mike Wells, from the Philippines, Justo, from Hong Kong, Lucy, and from Nigeria, Professor Yinka. Before I hand over to Professor Yinka to lead the discussion, I'd like to ask for your quick responses to what's been shared so far today. The new format and the focus areas for SFF this year. You're all long-term partners, so what does this new approach mean to you? And I'll start there with Mike Wells from a global financial institution perspective. Thanks for joining us. What do you think of this new hybrid format?
My pleasure for joining. I think it's consistent with the sort of the opportunity and the challenges we're getting in its current environment. You clearly can meet and reach a lot more people in this format than even as successful as the meetings have been in the past. And you also have the challenges of locally being able to, the breakouts and the touching people, the connection with new relationships, I think, in the smaller physical locations. So I think it's a good balance of the opportunity and dealing with the practicalities of where we are right now.
Mike, Justo, from an ASEAN perspective, right in this region, what do you think of this new hybrid format?
Well, I mean, I clearly prefer the old format, I have to admit. I think it's quite different when you're actually seeing people, their body language, how they actually react to you, relate to you, interface with you. I think that's very important, that real world face-to-face meeting. But, I'd like to echo what Mike says. I mean, kudos to the SFF to find a way around this situation and make things happen and continue on its mission to propagate and advocate fintech across the world, its benefits. So I'm really excited that we're showing resilience in getting our advocacies out to the public. Thank you.
And Lucy, from a fintech perspective, what's your view on SFF this December?
So I think, first of all, we're very proud to be a partner of Fintech Festival this year. And I think we're very excited about the new format because it presents a fantastic platform to tell the Airwallex story and amplify our brand to the global fintech community. And well done to the Singapore Fintech Festival team. We can't wait to be part of this important event.
Lucy, and Professor Yinka, last but not least, this year we had our very first inaugural Afro-Asia Fintech Festival, and it's very important for us to strengthen ties between the two regions. So I'd love to hear your perspective from Nigeria.
Okay, great. This format extends reach and participation, making it a truly inclusive platform for multi-stakeholder engagement. And in a study we recently conducted on the Lagos innovation ecosystem, this was one of the essential components that was missing in the ecosystem. And so I believe that this platform is going to extend beyond the 5 days of the SFF Switch event, and it's going to actualize global business trade corridors. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Professor Yinka. Please take us away to the panel.
Great. Thank you, and welcome, and hello, and welcome to this session titled Leading the Change, Sustainable Business Models. We've all seen digital technology advancements have created new opportunities for enhancing customer experiences, improving business productivity and competitiveness. But realizing these benefits warrants change for large institutions and startups. In this session, we're going to take a deeper look into the nature of that change as it relates to sustainable business models. And I'm glad to have Mike, Lucy, and Justo here, who are going to share the perspectives from different lenses and different sectors in the financial services ecosystem. So our conversation today will be against the backdrop of COVID-19 and the impact on the business models. So let's get ahead. Mike, I'll start with you. In your business, what makes a business model sustainable, and what has been the impact of COVID-19, and what changes have you effected?
Well, thank you. So with a firm that started in 1848, sustainable is, as you can imagine, a focus for us. Even our business in Singapore started in the 1930s. So 1931. So I think there's a couple of key elements that have always been true. You've got to evolve what the consumers need. You have to have an organization that learns and adapts to its, the talent in the organization, the structure, and you have to invest in the tools and technology for that organization, those people, to be able to perform. So, in COVID-19, you've seen us, there's been a number of learnings for us. We launched, in the middle of this, a health app, Pulse, an ecosystem, and it's got over 7 million downloads in the middle of this, and their hothouses are innovating on the weekends with our teams and launching, upgrades midweek the next week. You've seen our employees tested, trained, developed, and we've been as high as 95% of our staff, including Singapore, 18,000 people working from home. So the early work you did on infrastructure and IT and relationships with those key employees, were all the kinds of things that had to be done, I think, ahead of time to be sustainable across cycle and across an unknown path. For example, with COVID on when it on when it ebbs and flows. I mean, we actually the big medical challenge we were working on at the time when we launched, for example, was dengue fever. Not COVID wasn't even on the screen yet last November when we were finishing the initial drafts of this.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And Lucy, what's been your perspective as a startup?
So I think on the business side, obviously, Airwallex being a very infrastructure first business, we're heavily invested in foundations of what we do and ensuring that it's scalable and sustainable over the long run. But in the light of situations such as COVID-19, I think corporate social responsibility has become critically important. And we have an internal approach dedicated to this mission. So for example, recently we created a new role of People's and Operations Manager, which is dedicated to overseeing the sustainability and a mandate to invest to improve in it. So this role actually have KPIs to reduce our footprint and deliver sustainability initiatives. So some of the recent things that we've done is actually, working with suppliers outside of Australia and Hong Kong, China to bring personal protective equipment to our offices and, donating to the hospitals. And, we've also done quite a few social responsibility projects such as Australia's biggest warranty. I personally am involved in a charity called Meaning for Good. So I think over the long run, it's being mindful of this. Even as a startup, you have a lot of social responsibilities, and it's not just about growing the business itself, but also thinking of the community and the ecosystem.
Great. Thanks a lot for that, Lucy. So Justo, amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, can you share how UnionBank has evolved?
Well, we started 4 years ago the digital transformation journey, and we had to make a decision whether following a mainstream path of putting up innovation hubs and a separate subsidiary, digital-only bank, etc., or to digitize at the core. And we decided to digitize at the core. So we started that process 4 years ago, and we didn't do it with COVID in mind. We did it with the fourth industrial generation in mind. And so now, 4 years later, we have complete digital end-to-end customer channels, both on a retail level, individuals and corporate, both SME and large corporates. But the challenge was customer adoption. So it's what COVID did was accelerate the fourth industrial age, maybe 5, 7, 8 years into the present, because we've had customer, 300% more new customers that have come in during this period. And our transaction counts are 1,700% more than what they used to be. So what COVID did was address this issue that we were dealing with, that we had the whole back end sorted out, all channels, purely digital across all customer segments, but the customers were not ready. Well, they're ready now. And I think that this will carry on even post-COVID and accelerate the customer adoption to a digital lifestyle. So that was our experience to date.
Okay, great. So basically, I think that, Lucy, in your 5 years of existence, Airwallex has grown through product innovations, regional global expansions. Can you share some of the enabling and limiting factors that you've experienced in the process?
So obviously, as a startup, we've always been running short-term resources. So people has always been a very important factor in whatever we do. And when we're expanding globally, regulations and localizations have always been a challenge for us. But I think as business models are actually evolving over time, there are less limiting factors in terms of geography and in terms of physical presence that is changing how we actually operate as a business. And especially this year, we've started hiring a lot of people remotely who are working now for Airwallex, even in the global sense. And a lot of things are conducted digitally, less paperwork. So I think overall, things are changing, and the environment is actually being more innovative and more product driven. So I think Airwallex has definitely been riding the globalization wave and the digitalization wave.
Okay, great. Mike, I'll come back to you. You mentioned about creating an organization that learns. Can you because that seems to be one of the strengths and enablers, can you expand on that and share more insights on what you did in that process?
Well, I think there's some key elements to it. I mean, I'll give you I'll use Singapore as an example, just given the our hosts. So every employee in our Singapore office, 1,300 plus, has gone through artificial intelligence training programs done with a local university. All of the finance team has gone through, or 200 plus of them have gone through AI finance programs. So it's a bit to Justo's comment where you're not trying to say our IT team is digital. You're saying that these are the tools you're asking the organization to work with daily. So if you looked at one of our hothouses on the launch of Pulse, you're seeing people from all different organizations, parts of the organization, working on what the client outcomes and the improvements of the agent outcomes or our bank partner outcomes are, collaboratively. And you're training people real time, which again in this environment is very easily done. You're giving them good feedback, which I think is critical when people are working from home, so they know that their contribution is measurable to the challenges we're addressing and the innovation and things. And I think those sorts of attributes also give you an organization that finds talent within disproportionately. I was looking at our numbers before this meeting on Singapore. A third of the open positions we created last year came from people in the organization who weren't originally in that area. And they were the most qualified, and we looked internally and externally. So you've got to create an environment if you want talented people to work there where they can grow in the organization. And, people are at the end, the core of sustainability. Talent is, on so many dimensions is how you succeed.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. So upskilling your people across the organization in general. Justo, let me come back to you. You made reference to starting ahead of the of COVID-19 with your digital infrastructure. Can you sort of share what led to your decision of being a digital first and sort of creating that infrastructure rather than outsourcing or using other engagement mechanisms?
Well, about 4 years ago, in part of our strat plan, we changed the methodology into dynamic scenario planning. And we had a lot of global thought leaders that we spoke to prior and subsequent to, and successively every year, that gave us a vision of the future. And there were a lot of capabilities that we needed to build that we didn't have. And we basically redefined ourselves as a technology company, also a bank. And that's not just a gimmicky statement. It has a lot to do with how we think and how we do things. Because to a large extent, we decided in that process that we needed to collaborate with fintechs to a large extent, and we have done so. In fact, I'm the chairman of the Philippine Fintech Association, and we have done that. The only way to do that is through APIs, to do it efficiently and effectively without going through a process of so we have a API marketplace. We have 80 open APIs that are published in that marketplace. We get over 600,000 API calls a day of different fintechs that are connecting to our main banking rails in the national retail payment system. And that idea where not everything that the customer wanted, that the customer valued at the right price and the proper expected customer experience could be delivered by the bank itself. That in some instances, there were fintechs out there that could deliver that promise better. And number two, like I said, there was a mass adoption problem, and we thought that let the fintechs lead, let them take the customer acquisition costs up front, we provide the rails, and that symbiosis we thought would make us not arrive at the future, but begin to understand the future a little better, right? So the minute we changed our mindset and published our APIs, among other things, you know, we have blockchain executions that are live, and we even have a central bank approved stable coin that we use to exchange value in one of the networks that we've created among financial institutions, rural banks, as part of our sustainability challenge. So that mindset change, a different way of thinking, a different way of doing things, like a technology company, allows us to now integrate our systems with them, talk the same language, where speed to market is important, where customer experience is important, and where reliability 24/7 needs to be real time is a minimum digital hygiene. You know, once you came to that understanding, you knew you couldn't do it by carrying on what you were doing today. So we started that journey 4 years ago. We're actually almost done. I think in another, we're like 6 months done. All our branches are on the cloud, totally paperless transactions. You know, back offices are all using robotics, AI engines, mostly on the cloud, although we do hybrid cloud. So it's something that we needed to do because that's what we thought the customer would demand in the future.
Okay, great. So basically you've focused a lot on changing your organization and especially making it think and work and operate more like a fintech. But Lucy, you spoke about the regulators as a challenge and regulation as a challenge, and you're all in regulated industries. So tell me, how have you overcome some of these challenges?
So I think, 5 years now into building Airwallex, we have a very, I guess, structured way and process when we deal with regulators in general now. And I think most of the regulators have a very similar mindset when they are assessing, the compliance, AML, all of the policies that we have, internal controls that we have. So I think we are a lot more prepared compared to 4 or 5 years ago. And the way that we approach all of our regulatory conversations are with transparency. So being very upfront about what we're doing as a business, how we can, give them comfort to make sure that we're operating fully, in a very fully compliant way. And but knowing that each regulator might have different risk appetite in terms of their approach to new entrants into the market. But I think overall, we've gotten a lot better at how I guess we can present a very solid business case. And internally, we have very strict compliance requirements, and we make sure that all of our employees are very fully trained. And so I think, as a business, you're only as compliant as your internal people. So overall, over time, you win the regulators with the things that we are working on.
Great. And Mike, do you share that view in terms of transparency with the regulators?
I do. We have a, you can imagine with our industries, with the health and wealth space, there's a tremendous amount of regulation. And I think I'll give you an example of the level of cooperation. We went into COVID with probably 5% of the products that we can deliver to a consumer that rather improve their health inclusion or wealth inclusion, that were available virtually in a format like this. Most required face-to-face meetings, most required wet signatures. And as we sit here today, just half a year later, effectively 95% of the products we have globally are now available in this format because of the cooperation with regulators. And again, and part of it's being aligned with what they see as the social need you're addressing. But I think the trust comes from experience with regulators, and the trust comes from when you make a mistake or you do something that concerns them, that you address it robustly and aggressively, and you show that the quality of the business is as key to you as it is to them. And I think and then the learnings across markets. Now, let me give you a regulatory that we have. So with the success, for example, of our health ecosystem, Pulse, if telemedicine is turning out to be incredibly popular. We knew going into COVID that it was popular with young people because they don't like sitting in a doctor's office waiting for the doctor to feel like they're ready to see them. And they like just the efficiency of it. We know people who are away from city centers liked it. Now we're finding, of course, older people concerned about health, most people, like the technology. We can't transfer medical data across jurisdictions, across country borders, and most medical licenses don't cross country borders. So at some point you could run into a choke point here where you have a misalignment of the medical capability with the ability to get them accurate data and them to perform a valuable service in country. And those things are going to require a lot of cooperation with a lot of dimensions of regulation, because that's not one department of a government, that's multiple departments. Right? And they've got to see that as a need. So those sorts of things are ahead of us, but the things that have happened behind us have been very successful as regulators.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Now, just to wind up and just to start to round off our conversation, prior to this session, we had crowdsourced some opinions on digital technologies that would have the most impact on financial services. And some of them were central bank digital currencies, sustainable finance, open platforms, machine learning and AI, big tech, new banking licensing, and others. In Nigeria, some of the bets were on CBDCs and open platforms. Can you share your own bets and thoughts, and then also close with some personal advice for our business leaders and policymakers in attendance? So I'll start with you, Justo.
Well, I'll start with the advice. I think that the transformation journey is a very difficult, interesting journey. It needs to start at the top, at the board level. And while there's been a lot of discussion of new learnings, relearnings, a new way of doing things, new way of thinking, it's also a lot about unlearning a lot of the cognitive biases that we've acquired over time being successful enterprises. And we have 6 pillars in our transformation journey, the most important of which are culture building, and a culture of experimentation, a culture of living a purpose and values-based, as opposed to always being compliance-based, people, and building an agile organization and reskilling people. We have 73 new job families that have been created in the last 4 years that don't sound like anything you would see in a bank. Our processes, of course, and there's a lot of processes, cloud, robotics, AI, APIs, etc. So that's the third. The space, virtual and physical, and how they interrelate with each other. And our strategy needs to evolve accordingly. And the last bit, which is probably one of the more important bits along with culture and people, is the idea of community. That innovation is going to grow exponentially. That customers will have development tools, APIs, SDKs. They'll learn to code. They'll build their own interfaces with whoever they transact with. And that exponential growth, speed to market, can only be achieved in collaboration with other institutions. And that's a mindset change for a very large, mainstream, successful organization that knows what it's doing, has been successful, and is vertically integrated in terms of all its products and services. And I think that needs to be changed going forward, where collaboration, a sense of community, more customer centricity as opposed to product centricity become critical going forward. So that would be my sort of closing remark.
And your technology?
Our technology, we use, that's on the back end. So we're on the cloud. We use AI. We have an API marketplace for our own APIs, and we host others. We use robotic process automation on our processes as we convert them from manual to purely digital. So, you know, we do all of that. So we have a whole suite of technology, and we're now moving into a DevOps environment of continuous integration and continuous deployment that will really speed the change without the sacrifice of quality and in the products and services.
Okay, great. And Mike, your thoughts on the technology and your closing remarks and advice?
Well, I think let me take a slightly different angle, because I think Justo brings up a lot of the key attributes that firms need. I mean, to be agile, you have to partner. Insurance companies historically think they should own every piece of the operational technology chain end to end. It's an antiquated model. I mean, I told a story at a previous speech at when we were all together in Singapore of my second year with a company. I needed an HP printer cable, for those of you that remember those. And the IT team actually built one because they didn't trust going to a computer store and buying an off-the-shelf cable. It looked like a fire hose. We now partner with, Babylon, MyDoc, TikTok, Halodoc, Ovo, Tokopedia, Dr. On Call. I mean, all these firms, because they're good at what they do. They have clients that need services that related to what we're doing to include, to increase financial and health inclusion, right? Healthcare is, and I think there is and we can bring brand revenue scale to those relationships. If I were a firm in the audience who was looking to partner with a almost 200-year-old firm, I would look for proof points that they're actually innovating. I think you have to be very careful. Every insurance company says it's building a data lake. Every insurance company says it's got if they use terms like digital garage or I'm not wearing a tie today, but insurance CEOs generally should have a tie on and look the part. We feel naked without them. They should be able to demonstrate behavior to you that's consistent with compatibility with your idea, that your concept is actually going to fit into something that's working, not some public ambition that's yet to be proven. And I think firms like ours are very open to new technologies because we need to stay with consumer demand.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. And Lucy, for someone in a startup and was also recognized as 30 under 30 in Asia, what are your thoughts and closing remarks?
So I think on the technology front, maybe I'll just make a few comments on open platforms. So, Airwallex is actually building our own marketplace, and we this year started working with a lot of other tech companies on producing, sharing data and also producing products that are really targeting our user experience. So probably a little bit different to UnionBank and Prudential. We're very new, so everything we do is actually born on the cloud, and we don't actually have a digitalization process. We are already very and maybe an advice to startups who are watching this event. So, just because you're a startup doesn't mean everything you do is small forever. You actually have to be very scalable and sustainable in your approach and thinking about what your company would potentially look like, in 3 to 5 years' time, and really building towards that, as opposed to starting very small and not really thinking ahead on what you want to do.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to say we've had a very interesting conversation. When we look at the customer perspective, Justo reminded us of how COVID-19 has been a catalyst for digital adoption in general, and what we've seen in the last couple of months has been we've been trying to make happen for a couple of years. But then again, we must also realize that we need to continually have a customer-centric approach, not a product-centric approach. On the people side, we've learned from both Mike and Justo about how important it is to continue to upskill and unlearn, learn, and relearn our skills and processes and activities in general. Fortunately for Lucy, they were born in the digital era, so they didn't have any of these legacy antecedents to carry along with them. Then on the infrastructure side, I think this is key in terms of building that infrastructure. And this is where Lucy and Justo also came in. So the digitalization of your business is critical, especially for older organizations. I think what just said in terms of we have job categories that we no longer look like a bank anymore is something that we need to take into consideration. Finally, we also need to think about regulation and how to interact and engage with the regulators, both in across borders and within our countries. But transparency, cooperation, and experience also count. And last but not the least, I think we're living in a co-creation ecosystem. Partnerships, collaborations, and interrelationships are very important, and we can't do this alone. I think the one that scared me the most was when Justo mentioned about customers building their own applications and services and plugging into your APIs. We need to think about that. That might come in the future, it might not. But again, that's giving us more food for thought in that sense. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for. I want to say thank you to Mike Wells, Lucy Liu, and Justo Ortiz for the remarkable insights. And thank you all for joining this session.